Okay, back for part 2 of random functions. I've had a banana and I'm now ready to go. So let's see what we've got next. Randcat. So this isn't actually anything to do with cats. This is oh, that looks a bit like a cat though, coincidentally, but it's not one. It hasn't got whiskers for a start. No. I think the best way to start this is first look at cat, because we haven't done that either. And again, it's nothing to do with cats. It's short for concatenate. So what does that do? Let's see. BDSN, that classic pattern. Let's concatenate that to RP clap. So it's just playing one after the other. It's taking this pattern and playing it one cycle and then playing this the next cycle. Pretty simple. But if we put randcat here instead, then instead of just playing one after the other, it'll pick them at random. And you can add more here if you want. So T hash. So there's that. Again, you can also put this on other parts of a pattern, like you could do randcat for let's think of a different one this time. What other things are there? Vowel. So this is something which does vowel formants. So it makes a sound, filters a sound so it sounds like it's going through someone's mouth that is mouthing these vowels. So for example, let's have a simple kick snare. I'd actually like to take the rhythm from the vowel pattern, so I'll put that first. So that's just with a single thing. So even though I'm doing randcat, it's not really randomized because there's only one thing it's picking from. But if I do another one, there you go, randcat on a vowel instead of the sound which I was doing before. So W randcat. So we saw the relationship earlier between choose and W choose, where W allows you to weight the options with different probabilities. So make one of these things more likely than the other. So let's the first thing we need to do is put them all in parenthesis. And again, I'm going to have to double check what the order. I got it wrong last time. It's just the same. You put the thing and then you say how likely it is. So if I put 0.5 here, 0.5 here, 0.25 here, then relatively it will be twice as likely for one of these to play. Is that right? No, well, it'd be twice as likely for this to play as for this to play. So let's try that. So now I have to work out what's gone wrong. I can't really see the problem here, so let's have a look at the error message. No instance for blah-de-blah. Pattern A, double. Yes. Sometimes it's interesting to show errors in this kind of situation so that I can demonstrate how I solve them. At the moment, I'm not seeing a problem though. So I've got a sound pattern, so this should ultimately return a pattern of strings. And I've got a list here. Each one is what's called, here we go. I think that must be the problem. There's no comma. It's as simple as that. Okay. That wasn't a very interesting error, sorry. So we won't hear this CPU 58 very often. Well, we heard it there, but we'll hear the others more often. So there we go. That's fun. Stripe is going into a bit more unusual territory. So this is, it acts a bit like fast. So it's got the same structure. No, it hasn't, because it needs integers, so it needs whole numbers. With fast, you can give it a rational number. But it behaves similarly. So let's have a look what it's doing. So you give it a pattern of numbers, a pattern of things, and it returns a new pattern of things. So let's give it a pattern of things. So there's a kind of rhythm. I'll just mark it out so it's a bit easier to hear where the start of the cycle is. Right. So there's our pattern of things, which can be anything, but in this case it's a control pattern, and we can say stripe 2. So as I say, it's kind of similar to fast. It fits 2 cycles. With fast 2, it'll fit 2 cycles in the space of 1. And that's true also of stripe. So if I have just a simple clap marking out that start now. You can hear that it's repeating it twice within that cycle, but the 2 bits are of different lengths. So the first one will be of a random length, and the second one will fill in the rest of the pattern. So if it randomly picks 0.75, then the first repetition will last 3/4 of the cycle, and the second repetition will fit in 1/4 of a cycle. So it's a nice way of having a kind of really uneven thing that still fits perfectly with everything else in a way. Yeah, I find that pretty interesting. I mainly only use it with stripe of 2, but you can play about with the other versions as well. Okay, on to degrade. This is similar to what we looked at last thing in the mini notation. So if we have this, it'll play them randomly. So there's a 50% chance of each BD, each bass drum from the 909 synthesizer, I think, being played. So degrade is a function though, so just put that here, and that does the same. So here it's got a 50% chance of dropping out events. These will sound exactly the same, I think. So that's degrade, and degradeBy is similar to putting a number after the question mark. So if we want that to be dropped out 60% of the time, then degrade 0.6. Oh, degradeBy 0.6 will do the same. Okay. Sometimes this is actually, by the way, degrade is a nice way of making a sort of transition if you've got something really complicated going on. And I mean, I often am in this situation. I'm not sure how to move on to something different. If I'm doing a live performance, then one quick way is just to stick degrade on the front, and then it'll just you can still recognize what it's playing, but it's randomly dropping things out. And you can even then go back and change it to degradeBy, make it so it's increasingly degraded, and then start bringing in a different pattern to move on to a different part. Okay, sometimes. So again, let's start with a simple rhythm. So let's say that you wanted to reverse this, but only sometimes. That's kind of shuffling it quite a lot. But it has more structure than the shuffling. I think partly because this is actually symmetrical, the rhythmic structure of this. So that's interesting. Or we could say, let's make this a supply of squiz thing, but only sometimes. Or sometimes make it faster. Or make it faster and pitch it up. You can feel it's adding quite a lot of life to that simple pattern. So sometimes by is, you might guess this from the previous kind of alternatives to degrade. It's just changing the probability of this being applied. So if you want that to be applied 60% of the time, this squiz, then you do that. Or if you want it to be applied 90% of the time, you can do this. And actually there's some shorthands which I've listed here. So sometimes on its own is 50-50, often is 3/4 of the time, almost always is 90%, rarely a quarter of the time, and so on. Almost never 0.1. You get the, I mean, it's a bit of a joke, but it's quite nice at the same time. And now we're coming towards the end of this marathon journey through random functions. So someCycles. So with sometimes, sometimes is a bit unpredictable, which isn't a bad thing for a random function. But if you're manipulating time, say that this is harried by 2 but randomly, then it will play twice in that cycle, and this will only play once, but they'll shift around depending on how time has been sped up or not, and it can be pretty unruly, which I like in this case. But if we use someCycles instead, it's not making that random decision for every event. It's making that decision for all the events every cycle. So now for a cycle, everything will either be hurried or everything won't. And again, you can do that with someCycles and I think that's the first parameter. I could say, so that's the default, but I could make it more likely. Let's just check there's no error messages. Yeah, I've got it right. So now it's almost always hurried. Okay, again, we can put in something else. I'll get bored of squiz eventually. Put any function you want in there. Okay, finally, randslice. So we looked at slice before. So if I had break. I can pick slices from that. So that's the first quarter of that break. And I can drop in the third quarter halfway through. But if I instead use randslice, I don't give a pattern. So now it's picking a random quarter from this break once per cycle. It's not lining up very well. I think if I do loop at loop at 1, then it should be This is sort of not too useful a function on its own, I think. I mean, I guess it's a quick way of generating random slices. But remember that slice itself takes a pattern. So you could just give it a random pattern. Let me think. So we'd need a random pattern from, let's say, 0 to 4, because, let's take 8 slices. And then pick a random number from 0 to 7. That won't work on its own because we need to segment it, give it some rhythmic structure. But then you have more control, right? Because you can say, okay, I actually want 16ths. Or I could instead change slice to splice so that they loop a bit better. So randslice was made before I made splice and slice, I think, even. So yeah, you have a bit more control like this, but that's quite a There's different ways of doing different things, and it's you kind of develop your own set of things which work for you. Okay. So that's all the random functions I could think of. There might be some more that I'll dig out for later, but I think that's probably all of them. I hope this was interesting. As I say, randomness is a really nice way to quickly generate interesting patterns and add variety. But for me, it's not the end of the story. Having randomness can be a good way of bringing attention to some other part of your pattern where the structure is, or it can, if you just want something lively happening in the background or something like this, But if you also want to make a wind chime generator, then by all means, randomness is a really good way of doing that. Okay, so let's leave it at that. I'll tidy this up to make a nice worksheet for you, and spend some time editing the subtitles. That's always fun. And see you in the forum, and have a nice evening or morning or whatever. Yeah, bye.